Hi, everybody. It's Ken Burns. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks to the generosity of the Better Angel Society for the Next Generation Angel Awards, in which we're going to have a conversation with the 2023 winners, six extraordinary young filmmakers who've made some great films. Behind me, almost like a polar bear on an iceberg, is my executive producer, Chester, who's resting after a long and busy day. Um, I would just tell you a little bit about myself. I found this year's submissions and winners particularly compelling. I'm the son of an anthropologist, and so I've been, since the beginning of my life, as long as I can remember, interested in indigenous people. I've been interested in the story of race and the struggle for equal rights among women, and of course, been interested in the natural world. And so all of the films cover at least one, if not two or three of those topics. And I think you did it just magnificently. Um, my story of a filmmaker is born in tragedy. I lost my mom to cancer when I was 11, but I noticed that my dad, who I'd never seen cry, cried when there was a movie on television that he wanted me to stay up late on a school night and watch. And I remember being 12 years old, about 6 or 7 months after my mom passed away, after a long battle with cancer, that my dad cried at a movie. And I just suddenly realized that he'd never done that, and that the movies provided a kind of emotional safe haven for him. So I kind of vowed right on the spot that I would be a filmmaker. And that meant at that time a Hollywood filmmaker like Alfred Hitchcock or John Ford or Howard Hawks, who were the sort of reigning great directors of the mid 1960s. Um, I was 12 in 1965. And I just was devoted to that. Saw as many films as I could, thought I would do that, and ended up going to a wonderful college, an experimental college called Hampshire in fall of 1971. And all the teachers there of film and photography were social documentary still photographers and filmmakers, and sort of reminded me, as I think all of you have discovered, that there is as much drama in what is and what was, as meaning history, as anything the human imagination can dream up. So all of a sudden, by age 18, I'm interested in making historical documentary films. And the rest has been, I feel like I have the greatest job in the country because it educates all my parts and you dive into all these projects. And I'm particularly impressed with what you've done. All of you come through National History Day and a very rigorous competition from students from around the country. You're limited to a maximum of 10 minutes, which is often incredibly hard discipline, and you're writing and structuring and directing and collecting the archives and trying to tell an amazing story. And so I I'm just very interested in, before we sort of really get formally started in my Q&A of you, to ask you each, and we'll just walk around, maybe start with Jay, because the way my screen is just how you got into filmmaking, what drew you, just as I got interested through tragedy in a way, but it really brought things. And just to put a fine point on my story, is that many years long in my professional life, I bumped into my father-in-law, who was a very eminent psychologist. And he said, look what you do for a living. You wake the dead. You make Abraham Lincoln and Jackie Robinson and others come alive. Who do you think you're really trying to wake up? Meaning my mom. And so for me, there is always, in the 40 or so films that we've made, some an hour long, some 20 hours long, in that intervening time from when I entered Hampshire College in 71, this very intimate and emotional part of what we're doing. Um, so Jay, just tell us how you got to where you are right now. That would be really terrific. Your interest in filmmaking.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, once again. So for me, I was more of a newcomer to this. It was a brand new experience for me. I was in seventh grade when I decided to participate in National History Day. Um, yeah, I really just thought it would be a great experience. I was excited to start researching and produce a nice film.
That's great. Great. And Yelena, can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to filmmaking?
So I'm a band kid, so I know how impactful like music and audio can be for telling a story. And for me, filmmaking was the best way to combine that sort of audio component with visuals, and tell a story through that.
That's great. Shay.
Yeah, it was actually bit of a surprise that I stumbled across making a film for my History Day project. I was intending to do a website, and I really wanted to tell the story that I did about Glen Canyon, and I kept finding time and time again all of my research avenues. They all had these dead ends at film, and the website category at History Day has a 2-minute limit for putting in audiovisual content. And I knew there would be no way I could condense everything that I wanted to show in video to 2 minutes. It would just be impossible. And as a kid, I would ask my mom, "Can I borrow your computer to put some videos together of my dog and put them to music or whatever?" So I'd always kind of had this, I really enjoyed putting simple footage and simple music together and saying, "Oh, look at this fun product I made." Or I would do a little I would bring a camera on a family road trip and put it all together at the end with some music that I somehow burned off of my parents' CDs. But I would just dabbling here and there. And then for History Day, I was just thinking there's no better way to tell this story than with film because it just felt perfectly right. And I had to learn a lot along the way in terms of editing and how to use the tools. But it was really, really fun, and it was a surprise and a really, really good one too that I enjoyed.
I'm so glad, and it's so evident in all the work here of, it is a steep learning curve. It's hard to make films, and I think people don't always appreciate, how incredibly hard it is. And I think the fact that you've mastered at such an early age, some very complex editing, some really complex and at times contradictory history, but also the way you structured it shows something. Abigail, what's your origin story for filmmaking?
Oh, well, at my school, they have all seventh and eighth graders compete in National History Day for both of those years. And so when I was in sixth grade, my parents kind of encouraged me to do the project a little bit early, kind of just like as a practice project, because they thought that I wouldn't do very well in the competition. Or even at my school level, they didn't think I'd go anywhere with it. So after making a project in sixth grade, the teachers at my school ended up pushing the project to be able to compete with the seventh and eighth graders. And the project ended up going to nationals that year. And so seventh grade, I do the same thing. Eighth grade, I do it again. And then I also decided to compete in my freshman and my sophomore year of high school. And then after that, after winning all of those years, I decided to kind of start branching out, doing more physical artwork, doing photography, creating my own individual films that were more or less documentary focused, kind of more just like individual personal projects. And that's kind of where I am now.
That's really great. Maya, what's your story? How did you get drawn into this? You made such a lovely, lovely film.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to make a documentary that always seemed really fun to me and like the nicest final product. But also my topic, it was like there's no other way I could do it other than in a documentary because it's about art. And so it has to be really visual. And I also knew I wanted to include elements of Indigenous Australian music. And a documentary was the best way to communicate that and the most powerful way to tell a story.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. And did you come with filmmaking skills? And I mean, had you fooled around like Shay doing stuff before, or were you coming cold to this? Maya.
I was pretty new to this as well.
Yeah. And last but not least, Elena, tell us your story, how you got to where you're going.
Yeah, so I definitely got into history before I got into the documentary making. Um, when I first started, I thought documentary was off the table because there just wasn't any like pictures, but there were a ton of editorial cartoons. So I knew I wanted to be visual. So when it came time to choose what type of project I was doing, I just felt like documentary was the best option.
That's
And
great.
here we are.
And had you participated? I mean, Abigail's, talked about being involved for many, many years with National History Day. Is this your first or your seventh or
This was my first year.
your first? Well, congratulations to all
Thank
of you. It's really amazing. You know, I also wanted to mention that the Better Angels Society is involved with the Library of Congress Levine Ken Burns Prize, which awards a significant amount of money to filmmakers, established filmmakers or up-and-coming filmmakers who have finished a film or are very close to finish it and need finishing costs. And we had at the Library of Congress a wonderful event at the end of October, and at the end of November, there was the Student History Film Festival in Philadelphia, and what was so great was just how much back and forth among filmmakers there was, and so we're very excited to be involved and very grateful to the Better Angels for helping to support it. And nothing is more important to us than the Next Generation Angels Awards, because, you know, we're in a very, very complicated world. And what's so impressive to me is that you guys have taken a topic of your interest, and you have had to create this extraordinarily complicated, with lots of moving parts, story that you chose to do. And so I just applaud you all. I've seen all of your films, and I've also been aware in past years, because I've often gone to National History Day in Maryland, that I got to see the extraordinary quality of the films across the board, all around the country. And you come from diverse places, and it's very, very interesting. And so I guess I'd like to ask each of you for a while, just let's all engage. You know, I'll talk to you in conversation about something specific to your film. And I'd like to start with Maya, because as a kid, my father was an anthropologist. His area of study happened to be Alpine in Europe and Mediterranean, even the North Rim of Africa, peasants and their cultural stuff. But I grew up steeped in Native American and Southern African and Aboriginal interests. So your story was new to me about that moment when it went from being kind of ephemeral and painted in the sand and whatever. What drew you? I suppose there's a relative proximity with Singapore, but what drew you to the, you know, often tragic and fraught history of Aboriginal peoples in Australia?
Yeah, so I knew I was a little bit interested in Indigenous culture. So my teacher, Mr. Elm, suggested I visit a exhibit at the National Gallery of Singapore. And it displayed a huge range of Indigenous art, from the bark and sand paintings to canvases. And I was wondering, how did this happen? How did this shift so largely from natural surfaces to a permanent surface? And through that, I discovered the Papanyatula art movement, which happened in the 1970s. And it was when artists began painting on canvases. I think the most difficult part was discovering what the frontier was, because I spent so much time reading, and there were so many different frontiers. It was an art frontier, a new art genre. It could have been the physical desert frontier of Australia. But after looking for a while, I realized that cultural preservation had the most overarching effect on the lives of Indigenous Australians and other Australians, and taught the most important lesson about Indigenous communities worldwide and their rights and culture.
It's so interesting. I'm wondering. I mean, the beginning is so compelling, and it really draws you in. What were your big struggles with this? Obviously, to getting to time and having to cover as much as you can in that minuscule amount of time, 10 minutes, and at the same time, it's infinitely big as well. What did you struggle with the most as you were completing it?
Yeah, so definitely the 10 minutes was really difficult to try to get everything in, because there were so many aspects that I wanted to include, like women in painting. I couldn't include enough of that. But I I do think it was important to tell the story. Oh, one of the most difficult things was including different perspectives, or not including it, but trying to communicate it,
Yes.
because there was, in most people's view, there's one man, Jeffrey Barden, who came and was kind of the savior and starter of the movement. And I didn't want to portray him, who is a white man, as the sole savior, sole beginner of the movement, because there were so many other people involved. And so trying to find enough resources to begin with to communicate that argument and communicate it in a clear way was difficult.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And too often our histories are from the top down, and we don't give agency, or we assume the other people that we're interested in don't have any agency or are passive to the circumstances and require saviors of different kinds. I thought your film really skirted that and avoided those kind of pitfalls, and yet could see there was a variety of viewpoints. Yelena, I have to tell you something and confess that I have been working for the last 6 years on a history of the American Revolution. And of course, at the heart of the cause of the American Revolution is not just taxes and representation that we all do it, but it is, of course, the scramble for Indian land. And nothing made that more sort of nothing was more designed to anger them up than the British Empire, which had won the 7 Years' War, what we call the French and Indian War, and realizing they had, be careful what you wish for, that they had a gigantic empire and they couldn't protect settlers. And they did this proclamation and this line that forbade colonists from going west over the Appalachian Mountains. There you were with your film, and as I watched it, I went, wow, I hadn't seen that image, and I hadn't seen that image. And while it's a sort of minor part of our film, at least in the beginning, I want to commend you. So I want to know how you got to this, and then what your big struggles were too, in the organization of this material and the collecting visually, because of course you range across a lot of time in the story, and yet you're focused on something that takes place in essentially the middle of the 18th century.
Yeah, so like you said, I did start with the Revolutionary War and looking at that. I was originally interested in doing like a local topic, so I was looking into like the founding of Tennessee as a state, and I saw the Proclamation Line of 1763. I was like, oh, I know what that is. And so I was doing a bit of research on it, and then like one thing led to another. I was digging through sources, and I was like, oh wow, that's actually really important, and nobody knows about it, and it's still impactful today. And I didn't feel like that story was told enough, and so I decided that that was what I wanted to focus on. And then finding sources for visuals was quite hard. I spent several hours poring over digital archives trying to find primary images or paintings or cartoons or whatever to use. When it came to the more modern visuals, there were photos and videos I could use that I wanted to include as well, because they also told an important part of the story, but it was quite the spectrum of sources I used.
Yeah, I know we're having the same problem. There are no photographs, there's no newsreels. I don't really like reenactments, so we follow some reenactors, but we wait until the sun's going down and they're silhouetted and lit by, so there's something more impressionistic about it. Let me just ask you too, as you've been with your co-winners for a while, you know each other, you understand that. What have you learned from them in the course of doing this? Because some of the solutions or some of the questions that you had about how you do visual solutions, some of them, like Maya, for example, is dealing with live cinematography of Central Australia. And so I thought maybe, what did you think of seeing other people's efforts that are so remarkable?
Yeah, so I watched all of the other senior individual finalists at National History Day, and I liked everybody's documentaries. I got a lot of ideas for like how to display graphics, because everybody had like a unique style for how they chose to portray their visuals, and I thought that was really cool to watch. There were a lot of good techniques. Also, that it's always okay to just go sit in the library and read a bunch of books until you find what you're looking for. So
Yeah, we do depend on those librarians and archivists, don't they? They're our best friends. Jay, I want to know how you came upon this topic, how you stumbled upon this remarkable woman, and I also think my sort of secondary question to you is how you then manage not just the through line of the biography of this one person, but also how you were able to capture, big movements about vaccinations and other people that were involved. It was a masterful job, I thought, of corralling all those sources. And also, I appreciated the fact that though many of the things, particularly among anti-vaxxers, which we're so familiar with today, you didn't take it up to the very present. You kind of acknowledged it, but you used a sort of recent present, which helps to keep it from perhaps becoming overly political. So I've just dumped about 10 questions on you. So good luck.
So, my topic selection process was based purely on just research. I wanted to find a topic that was related to medicine, and I just thought that if I was going to make a project over the course of months, I would want to do it on something I'm interested in. So I looked into medicine. That was my favorite topic. And throughout my research, I came upon a Smithsonian magazine. It was titled Pearl Kendrick, the pioneering researcher who ended a deadly plague. And I look at it and I think it was just perfect. And after that, it was I looked into her a lot, and I realized this was the perfect topic. So after getting this finalized and starting my documentary, what I did was I was focused on Pearl Kendrick's path, and then almost all her interactions with other people. Like, for example, bringing Lonnie Gordon on to the
Right.
team, I would go into these like sub branches and research more about them. So it's not just focused on one person. So and it gives more of a perspective to the story.
Yeah, it really does, and I was impressed by that. And I imagine there are difficulties. We try to, in our own structuring, keep lots of different stories going and lots of different through lines. And of course, we can spend more than 10 minutes. But it was so admirable that you were able to include so many sort of, you could say, tangential or subsidiary stories and still make it a cohesive thing about her and get to show the Smithsonian Magazine cover at exactly the right moment in the film. How did you do that? I mean, what were or maybe what's the struggles that you had in sort of sequencing it and writing it? Did you have a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor, as Maya was talking about?
So since I was new to this, there was a lot of things that I just didn't expect. And number one was definitely the time limit. So even like today, I'm making another documentary, and I'm making my script right now, and I've already faced the trouble of time. I'm
Right.
starting to put so much information into it, and my recordings are already over 10 minutes. And so during the time when I had my script developed and it was over 10 minutes, it was a really big issue. I had to figure out how to cut it to keep the story still like stable. That was definitely one big issue. And another one was, so when choosing a documentary, I really didn't think about the problems I would run into.
Right.
And there were not many sources I had for this topic. It forced me to reach out to places you couldn't just find on the internet. And that really did improve my research skills, and I think it really made me a better historian. So that was definitely one problem, the limited amount of sources.
Right.
Thankfully it didn't have a bad impact.
I've said this to people and my coworkers is that I see each film as a million problems, but I don't look at the word problem as pejorative. I see it as opportunity, something to overcome. I mean, this is our script for the 6 episodes of the American Revolution. It's almost down to time, but I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to balance all these stories? How are we going to tell? And a lot of it is just that collaborative thing, finding that archive that has the portrait of the person, or finding someone who's into maps who says, you know what, there's a really great map. And I know that the the story of the Indian Magna Carta, Yelena, has got, there are all these maps that are kind of, as one historian put it in our film, aspirational. North Carolina just goes on forever, as if that wasn't, the 1763 line didn't bifurcate it, or that they just did not appreciate who lived there, as if it was empty space, theirs for the taking. And you find that we're starting our film now with Native American voices. Like, we know the land is valuable, is how our film begins, from a Native American voice. Let me see, Elena. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what you brought up earlier. First, how you got interested in Elsie, but then how you, with the lack of material, began, I thought, incredibly effectively to use those cartoons, to use the drawings there. It was wonderful. I just had great admiration for what you did. Can you talk a little bit about your process in regard to that and just discovering her?
Yeah, so when I didn't have any materials, my teacher suggested, and I also discovered newspaper archives. Like, each state has a digital newspapers collection, so the California one was really useful to me. And then obviously the Library of Congress chronicling America. And not every article, but a lot of the articles she wrote had an editorial cartoon. And some of them, they could like they didn't really fit without the context of the story, but a lot of them were really powerful just on their own. So it kind of feels weird to admit this, but whenever I didn't know what to put there, I would just search for a cartoon and kind of hope it fit.
Yeah.
Almost.
Everybody here knows what you mean by admitting, like they're not shortcuts, they're not cheating, they're just, what are we going to show here? How do we make this come alive?
Mhm.
I take a walk every morning for 2 or 3 miles with my pooch, who's now behind me. And I take my phone with me, and I realized that this area looked exactly like it did in the 18th century. Maybe the trees were first growth, but I'll film atmospherics and different things to be able, and the filmmakers are, the editors are cutting it into the film, and it's working from my phone when normally we'd be using a big professional camera. Anyway, so how did you find Elsie? How did you stumble on her? She's such a marvelous figure.
Yeah, I was kind of randomly clicking through the National, or the Women's History Museum. They have a page where it's a bunch of images of historical figures and then their name, and when you click on them, it gives you a short biography. And I was just sort of clicking through randomly because I honestly had no idea what my topic was going to be. And then I found Elsie, and I realized what a big impact she had, and it definitely sparked my curiosity more than a different topic would have, just because she was so well known and I knew nothing about her. So
it's a really remarkable story to think how, I made a film on Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who sort of authored the amendment. Although they both passed away when women were given the vote, but some of these struggles and some of the things that she's talking about were things that Stanton and Anthony were talking about a century before, and still, women were not had any rights a century later with Elsie, and she's hammering for them. I thought this was a terrific film. Shay, how quickly did you come to your 3-section thing? I thought that was a magnificent structuring, that you introduced it in the beginning and then you came back to it and you grounded us throughout in a very complicated and dynamic story that is both about a natural wonder and a big engineering project and the question of water and native involvement in the story or non-involvement in the story. And, the 10 minutes goes by like that. And as I was thinking about it, I realized that there was some organizational genius in those three parts. Did that come early, or is that something that you hit upon in order to organize and help you tell a pretty complicated story with lots of moving parts?
I think two things were the biggest motivators behind the structure of the documentary. I think one thing was that I'm just a very visual person. I love to have things mapped out. Whenever I have to write an essay or a paper, I go to a whiteboard and just draw everything out and draw arrows and lines and boxes and put things here, put things here. And I did the same thing in a classroom at my high school for the documentary. And I thought, okay, I have so much stuff to tell the story of. And I was taking a whiteboard marker and just drawing everything out. And I started to notice, okay, some of these ideas started to kind of group themselves.
Right.
We have the three main themes, and they just kind of, the themes honestly revealed themselves to me. And then what solidified it was when I was putting together the footage. Since I'm just a very visual person, I love having everything laid out, how it would be in my mind. And I was putting together the footage, and I'm thinking, gosh, if I were making a poster or some sort of exhibit of this topic, I would have a trifold. I would have the first theme, the second theme, the third theme, and it just made sense based on the footage that I discovered and the story I wanted to tell, and then the brainstorming I had done earlier, just to have kind of that sequence. And I love having a clear structure just because it allows, me as the person who's making the documentary to kind of come back and say, okay, I've been working on this yesterday. I'm going to keep working on it today. Where do I add more? Where can I edit? This section might be good. Let's move on to this section. And it just helps create continuity, I think, for myself.
Yeah, it's really wonderful, and you can see that, we don't do storyboards in advance, but once an episode is coming together, we'll put cards, 3x5 cards, different colors on a board so we can look at it from afar. I think filmmaking is kind of respiration, breathing in and breathing out, and that moving from one thing to another. So a card that would be one color might in the Revolution be battles, or it would be home front, or it'd be Native American themes, or it'd be in England, or it'd be something like that. And so you begin to see how you rhythmically decide the film. And I was very impressed with the way the Glen Canyon film did all that. It was great.
Thank
It was
you.
really great. Abigail, last but not least, wow, what a topic. I knew the Chicago story and the riot there because we'd covered it in at least one film, Jazz, I think it was. And it's just so upsetting how I'm presuming because so much of the thematic content had to do with Baltimore that you stumbled first on that and then sort of reversed engineered out to a larger picture, which I thought you told with particular delicacy and poise. So kudos and congratulations to you. But give us an origin story and some of the struggles with it.
So the way that I kind of first came across my topic was when I was volunteering at the Maryland Zoo, which is in Druid Hill Park. And in Druid Hill Park, there's a #1 pool and there's a #2 pool. And so I had actually seen that the #1 pool was still open, and I'd seen that the #2 pool was actually abandoned. And so at first, I didn't really think anything of it, but I kind of started to wonder, like, why is this pool closed? Because it was summer at the time, and I was like, that pool should be in use. So I started asking, it just started off by me kind of asking questions about that pool. Then I started to do a little bit of research. I started to read books, and I started to realize that this pool and many other pools across the United States had a very deep-rooted history of segregated swimming kind of attached to them. And then after that, I kind of started to realize, wait, it's not just segregated swimming, it's all recreational spaces. And so this was kind of something that I didn't really know anything about. I never learned about this in school. We learned about the civil rights movement, we learned about Martin Luther King Jr., but we never learned really how important the right to reclaim recreational spaces really was in the civil rights movement. Like, it was where some of the most important and violent racial conflicts occurred in the civil rights movement. And it was also one of the last things to be resolved in the courts. And so in the past 5 years that I've been competing in National History Day, every single year I've kind of like to cover a topic that's kind of unique that a lot of people don't really know about, because I don't really want to cover something that I already know. I want to cover something
Right.
that's going to like intrigue me for 10, 11 months while I work on the project. And so that's kind of how I stumbled upon the
I,
project.
it's interesting. I feel the same way. I never make a film about something I know about, because then if I tell you what you should know, that's called homework. And there might be a quiz next week. But if you share with people a process of discovery, it's animated by that enthusiasm that you develop over the course of it. And there's the English romantic poet William Blake said you could find the world in a grain of sand. And I think there's something incredibly appealing, Abigail, about taking what seems to be a specific thing, like a swimming pool, and allowing that to just represent the story that it is, but also represent a larger, in this case, struggle for equality and opportunity. It's really well done, but it must have been incredibly hard for you to do it. What was the biggest obstacle, do you think?
I'd say that there were two main struggles that I faced. The first being definitely the visual component of it, because I could find a lot of like resources that like told the story, but it was really hard to kind of find visuals for my film that would kind of engage my audience or be connected to what I was telling. And kind of the second most challenging thing was like interviewing people, like finding
Yeah.
someone whose story I thought I really wanted to like include and that it would engage my audience and stuff. And so I ended up meeting Miss Scott,
Yeah,
who
she was wonderful.
and I talked to her for, 2, 3 hours. I got to come to her home and interview her. And I kind of felt like a kinship with her a little bit. And I thought that she was just like, once I met her and once I talked to her, I was like, this is definitely the person I want to interview. This is the person I want to include because her story is such a significant one. Being one of the first African American women lifeguards at her pool, kind of the discrimination that she faced being, an athletic teacher at Polytech, which is a school in Baltimore. I
Right.
just thought that once I met her, I was like, this is definitely the person I want to include. But it definitely took a lot of other people to interview to kind of find that person.
Yeah. Yeah. You always, I'm talking to you from New Hampshire, and we make maple syrup here. And I like to say that, this type of filmmaking is it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. And you have to do a lot of interviewing. And of course, you only use a fraction of the interviews that you do. And of those interviews, you use just a fraction of what that person said. It's an interesting kind of triage. Okay, so this is now the new round where you guys get to interrogate me. So I hope you're prepared with some questions. And who wants to go first? Raise your hand and we'll just move it. Maya.
Hi. So, when I was making my documentary, I really struggled with what to put first, like what to start off the documentary with. And I switched it around so much during the process. I went from focusing on money with an Aboriginal art auction winning $2 million or getting sold for $2 million. And then I had that for a while and I went to having an Aboriginal voice at the beginning. So because they're the oldest continuous surviving culture, so I really wanted to include that, a voice. So my question is, how do you tell your version of your story while representing the voices of the people that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? I mean, we're all obligated to sort of look at the world and try to interpret it and be fair about it. I find the kind of films that we all do incredibly powerful because they have the ability to include diverse perspectives. And so, for example, our American Revolution film that I'm working on right now, along with 5 other ones, but it's sort of the big one that's going to come out in a couple of years. Um, and we've been working on it for 6, is that we had other beginnings. And I suddenly, a year or two ago, just said, no, we're going to start with a Native American voice because they're, and it was, it was met with some resistance internally until it was really clear that that was the way to begin. And now everybody's excited. And just this afternoon we were working and we had a wonderful quote from a Cherokee, sort of a collective statement by Cherokee women that was sort of addressing not themselves, but the sons who had fought in the American Revolution on essentially the other side. Most Native peoples supported the British. There were several tribes that were, supporting Americans, but it really divided a lot of indigenous people in the United States. And I thought maybe we should go out the way we came in. Not with the classical quotes that you'd think would end something on the American Revolution, but remind people, as the opening quote is that the land is everlasting. And so I don't know if tomorrow that will still be the same or 6 months from now, but I think that's the important thing, is to always keep things open and fresh. And in some ways that time limitation for you is incredibly severe, but me too. We've got to operate with these complex stories. So having a diversity of point of view is really important, but that choice, you made the right one to start with a voice, pulled you right into this. Okay, Jay, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so my first question is, music definitely plays a really large role in a documentary. And like my topic this year, Charles Drew, he's like a pioneer in blood banking. He doesn't really like, for certain topics there's music directly associated with it.
Right.
That's not really going on here. So for situations like this, how would you choose music to go with your
Yeah, what a great question. So a lot of people put their music in at the end. We do it completely differently. We record our music at the beginning and it's there in editing. So we will change words in our script to fit a phrase of music, and we'll change everything. My brother, who makes documentary films too, said this wonderful thing a few years ago. He said that all the art forms, when they die and go to heaven, aspire to be music. It's the only art form that's invisible, right? All the others are visual in some way. And so from reading a book and literature to paintings and obvious dance and, ballet and other sorts of things, film, theater, painting, photography, sculpture, all of that is a visual thing, but music isn't. And so there's musical equivalencies, I call them, so that you have in your story a kind of underlying tone or emotion or whatever. There's nothing quicker than music to support it. And so while there might not be a direct connection in the way Maya may be able to use and incorporate Aboriginal music in the story she's telling, you're in some ways liberated to use whatever works, in that. Abigail?
I think that Shay had his hand up before I raised
Oh.
mine.
Okay, Shay?
I will get, if you don't mind. Okay. Yeah, I just had a question about place. And I remember watching when I was I don't know, maybe 10. My grandmother gave me the set of DVDs of your Lewis and Clark documentary. And I remember watching that. Just I would, hey mom, can I borrow your computer to watch? So I would put the DVD in and watch. And I just remember like I was almost transported to the scenes that you were showing. And I almost felt like I was in the place, whether it was the combination of the music, the images you were showing, or just the how it was all put together. I really felt like I was there. And how when you're crafting a documentary, even if it's about a more widespread event that happened over a bunch of places like the American Revolution, how do you convey that really special feeling of place and just the really unique feeling of being somewhere and conveying that to the audience through film?
Oh, thank you. You've just paid that film a wonderful compliment. And I kept thinking of talking to my co-producer and writer, Dayton Duncan, who's also in it. It's interesting in that film, we knew that we were going to try to shoot in the places where you can kind of see what they saw. It's pretty hard. It's a built environment, and sometimes if I'd pan the camera like a couple of degrees, there'd be one of the missile silo sites that dot the Lewis and Clark Trail. Or, after the shot was done, a car zoomed by and you didn't realize that in between you and this beautiful scene is a highway, and we just by getting down low, we'd miss showing it. We also realized that all of that, in order to understand it, we actually had to do, as I said earlier, what we don't really like to do is out of those 2 hours, 4 hours, we needed to go and film people who reenact it at all levels. The keelboat, the basic thing was to understand it wasn't just two guys and a Native American woman and a dog, which is how everybody thinks of it. But it's a military company. It's 48 people. It's 24. And when Charbonneau comes in with his young wife, Shoshone wife, Sacagawea, and how that you sort of had to see that from afar, portaging, poling the big keel boats, campfires, repairing moccasins, all of that, as minimal as it is, helped you then see it through their eyes. And that was, I think, the key, is that if you could imagine them, then you could imagine them seeing this, and that you could then do what we all want to have happen, is for somebody to see something new. You know what it's like when you're taking somebody to a place that you know really well. You're inviting a new friend over to your house, and you're introducing your house in a way, and as you introduce it, you're seeing it new, and hope they see it not just new, but with all the associations that you have. And in a way, I think that's what the element of visual filmmaking is. You're just saying, hey, let me take you here and tell you what happened in the Battle of Brandywine in the Delaware, Pennsylvania border, or cowpens in a pasture in central South Carolina. How do you make that come alive? There's some places like Valley Forge where you got a couple of stone buildings that still exist, but you can't film in the Lexington Green. You got to resort to paintings and other sorts of details. And so we're trying to use reenactment as sparingly as possible. It's really a complex thing. I think the whole thing is about that. And as I said, if you have a 40-to-1 ratio, then you're always in your mind, not just what's in the film, but also what's not in the film, the negative space of creation. I like to think of a sculptress bringing, a block of stone to her studio, and what we see in the gallery or the museum is what we see, but on her floor is the negative space of creation. She knows that and has to honor that as well, what's not in. And that, by the way, doesn't make part two, right? You can't gather that stone together. It's necessary loss, and that is not bad stuff. People think the cutting room floor, when you say that's on the cutting room floor, as every one of you knows, the cutting room floor has really good stuff, right, Maya? Like more indigenous women, Aboriginal women stories that you're struggling to get in. So I think that's it. Abigail?
My question is kind of about like my future in filmmaking. So in the past like year or so, I've kind of decided that I want to pursue filmmaking, but more specifically editing in college. And I was wondering what kind of advice you could give me on that.
It's pretty interesting, Abigail. That's great. And I thought we'd all sort of be talking not so much about what your future is, because you have every right in the world to just be not sure, or you can be like me and possibly you, knowing exactly what you want to be from an early age and sort of going at it. I could tell you what to do if you wanted to be a doctor, Jay, if you wanted to be a lawyer, but it's really, really hard because, at least in documentary, feature film, you can also sort of tell a career arc, but I don't actually use the word career. I just say professional life, because all of the documentary filmmakers that I know have arrived at it in a completely unique way. That's basically reflective of them having a kind of inner sense, a Socratic sense of knowing yourself, and also be willing to persevere, because all of you know exactly how hard it is to make a film. It does not make itself, and for it to be well received, as all of your films have been, and seemingly seamless, it takes a lot of hard work to sort of hide those seams, and we're in awe. So I think, if it's in editing, then I'd say, lots of colleges and places have opportunities to do that, but then you want to get into a real world situation as much as you can as an intern or some other low level thing, to just learn, obviously, the fluency on some of the programs like Avid that we've been using for the last 20 plus years, or some aspect of it, and find a teacher who can be really good. I mean, I met this old guy once. He said there's only one rule in filmmaking, which means editing. He was an old editor. He said, and I felt like I better get out my pen and paper and write down this pearls of wisdom. He says, a shot lasts as long as it lasts. And I sort of paused, and he goes, that's it. you know, and the older I get, the more I realize how absolutely true it is. So I think a lot of it is a circumstance that you're going to make, and it's through discovery and trial and error, because everybody, as I said, that's making documentary films that, started off when I did, 50 years ago, are still making, if they're still making documentary films, it's a completely unique path that they forged, having to do with who they were and where their interests were and what they wanted to do. Right? Elena. Elena, do you have a question?
Sorry, no.
Oh, okay. All right. Does anybody want to add something? Yes, Jay. You had, oh, right. You said you had a second question. And Elena, I'll get to you in a second.
So throughout my documentary, as you have probably seen, I have been using the Ken Burns effect a lot. And I just wanted to know your story behind creating it.
It's pretty funny. So the Ken Burns effect is not me. That's Steve Jobs. He thought it up. He got somebody to do it. He and I became friends because he invited me in to show me how it worked. And it's basically a kind of superficial, I don't mean that bad, version of what we do, which is trying to wake a photograph up. And it's not just looking at the photograph and treating it like the feature filmmaker I originally wanted to be, with a master shot, a long shot, a medium shot, close shot, a tilt, a pan, a reveal, insert of details. It's also listening to that thing, trusting that that photograph was once alive. Are the troops tramping? Is the bat cracking? Is the crowd cheering? All of those things you ask yourself, even as you're just filming, how will I animate? How will I wake the dead? How will I, shake this photograph alive? That's what it is. And it's hugely complex, and use lots of tricks that are both oral and as well as visual, and lots of techniques that we employ to do it. And this is a really simple one, and so we developed a friendship over him calling me into his office in late 2002 and showing me this. And I was, still in pretty much of a Luddite. I went, oh. And he said, and all computers from now on, next month, January of 2003, will have this. And I said, oh, great. And then he said, we want to call it by the working title. I said, oh, what's that? He goes, the Ken Burns effect. I said, I don't do commercial endorsements. And he looked at me and he goes, what? And so after about an hour, I convinced him to give me what turned out to be hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in hardware and software, which I gave away to nonprofits. Schools, kids that needed Final Cut Pro, which was a little less of a complex thing as Avid, but nonetheless a completely wonderful piece of software, as well as the actual hardware of computers that students would need, and not just filmmakers, but nonprofits doing work in justice and child services and things like that. So, and we did, I think he was so stunned that I didn't jump at it right away, that we ended up with a nice friendship that lasted his really way too short life. Elena.
I was going to ask, you talked a bit at the beginning about what motivated you to start making documentaries. I was wondering if there was any particular instance that you were like, okay, I'm going to continue making documentaries. This is the thing for me. I didn't know if there was any instance like that in your life.
Well, it's interesting because I was just talking to somebody about this lately. I just had actually the guy in Lewis and Clark who was the writer and the co-producer, and we'd worked together for 30 years, more than 30 years, and he retired. He's just a few years older than me, and he just retired. And first he stopped producing, and so he just wrote Benjamin Franklin, and the same thing with the most recent film of ours on Buffalo. But he's retired, and I was talking to someone yesterday. I go, I don't know what to do. I know I'm working on 6 films right now. I know what I'm doing to the end of this decade, and God and funding willing, I hope to just keep doing it. So there's not a kind of thing, but I do remember that moment, as I told you, with my dad. That meant yes to filmmaking. I do remember realizing in the first year of Hampshire that it was yes to documentary. And I remember towards the end, one of our chances to make it would be the equivalent in any other place besides Hampshire, which turned all the rules of secondary education upside down. The senior thesis, I guess, in college was making a film and the topic was history. And the last shot of that film, I panned across a painting, completely accidental, not knowing that I just described the next 50 years of my life. But I love it. I mean, there's not a day that goes by. I mean, when I put my head on the pillow tonight, I want to just know that I've made a film better. And today I think I made a film better. Even the scary thing I told you about taking this quote that we hadn't quite found a home for, by a kind of collective of Cherokee women, and maybe that's the last word of the film. Then maybe it won't be, but we'll see. So I'm still, it still gets me going. I still feel pretty passionate about it. Do you feel like that? I mean, it seems like Abigail really, at least at this moment, really knows what, if not how to do it, where to do it, but that she's going to do it. What's your sense of where you want to be in pursuing film or keeping your options open?
I have absolutely no idea what I want to do with my life.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. You know, I wanted just to ask you all, and anybody can just chime in. You don't have to answer. There's not this. Writing is central to all of your films. It's central to mine. And people sort of in a knee-jerk way presume that the word is the enemy of the image. But we all know how critical it is. And as to steal from the Bible, in the beginning is the word. And that we are rooted in that. And I found all of your writing to be spectacularly good. And some of it, in some cases, just poetic. So I just want to know the extent to anybody who wants to volunteer, how much of a struggle it was, or how that was the anchor, that allowed you to do it. Or we've already discussed cutting it down. I get that. This is what I do every day, and it's, you're just, as the editor, as they say in journalism, you kill the little darlings. That is to say, the sentence in the newspaper article that you've just handed to your editor, the sentence that you think is the best is the one he's going to take out, or she. Anyway, does anybody have a writing kind of, maybe not just a statement, maybe it's just a question too about it, but I was super impressed by the quality of your writing, not just in that structural and organizational way, but actually in how you chose words. So anybody? Okay,
I
I'm
guess
gonna
one
call
part
out
that
somebody. Yeah, I'm gonna call on Shay because I didn't think that you would be at a loss, right? And as soon as you go like this, I know how important words are.
I'm definitely a hand talker. I think one of the most important ways that writing influenced my project was I started in books and I started researching from books, and then when the words kind of stayed with me, and then I went to film and found all the audiovisual stuff for the project, and then it went back to words. I feel like the words that I had read in books helped guide my research, which in turn helped guide what I was trying to show. And oftentimes I have my microphone set up in front of me. I would play the documentary or a section of the documentary without any intention of what to say, and then just start talking. And I would just describe what I wanted to convey. And a lot of the times the words just came from what I was putting together in the project.
Wow. Does anybody have something that's wildly different from that? No, I worked on this as an essay and I wrote it. And then after I got it written, I started to add pictures. Maya,
Yeah.
is that your experience?
Yeah, I spent so long writing the script because for me, like I wanted to have the script solid and perfect and know exactly what I wanted to say and the story that I wanted to tell before I even started editing or doing any of that. I mean, I guess I could form that into a question, like how do you
Yeah, well, so we do the same thing.
when
We
the
we
script's done?
we have what we call our blind assembly. So the writer will write the first draft, and then maybe the second draft, I'll correct some stuff and put it in language. I'm the scratch narrator until the very last moment where we bring in a professional narrator. So I'm reading stuff that sometimes reads well, doesn't speak well. So you just sort of make little adjustments there. And we don't put it to the editors until we go through 3 or 4 blind assemblies where we throw in the talking heads wherever they are, just happy accidents. We never say to a talking head, can you get us from paragraph 2 to paragraph 3 on page 5 of episode 4? We often do those interviews before there is a page 5. we then throw them in. And so we look at blind assemblies. It's like a radio, like we're just hearing the words and we're seeing the talking heads people with jump cuts and whatever in them. And then after, in a big series like this, we might go through 2 blind assemblies, maybe 3. And then we say, okay, pictures. We've managed the story, we've managed the structure, and now let's see how to make it come alive and make it dimensional with the pictures and music and sound effects and things like that. Rudimentary sound effects in the beginning, but eventually exploding that outward to dozens and dozens of tracks. So it's that way. And so it really does mean that in the beginning is the word. And it's, I love, Shay, your solutions. It seems incredibly brave and yet a really wonderful creative process. Anybody have any other writing stuff? Yes, Elena.
Yeah, so I'm somewhere in the middle. I started mine with an essay sort of thing, and then I was kind of recording the audio to try to match visuals to it, and there would just be parts that I was like, nope, that doesn't work at all. And so then I kind of just did it a bit more like Shay with the presentation style, just like, hey, what words do I think would match this visual? And then once I had done that and fixed the audio and I was happy with it, I used voice to text and I rewrote the script so I had it for the next time I needed to
Wow.
revise. And it
Wow.
was quite the process.
Well, I spent more than 2 hours a day reading narration changes for maybe the 4th or 5th time on episodes 4, 5, and 6 of this 6-episode thing today. And I spent a week ago Friday reading for 4 hours, 1, 2, and 3, all the changes we made, and we'll keep making changes. And we have these little voices in the back of our head that we want to be louder voices. Like, I'm not sure I like that. And if I read it long enough, I'm going to allow the weakest voice inside that isn't sure to at least have a chance to say, that doesn't sound as good. Is there another way to do it? And I'll sometimes change the writing right on the fly. And I'll have people listening in that are my co-producers and co-directors. And so today we were doing that stuff that we'd worked on this morning and figured out it was going to be this way. By this afternoon, listening to it, we were changing it. And so, we don't bring in the narrator, as I said, until we're 98% of the way through. And even then, we're bringing him back in saying, we changed something. More often than not, it's because we learned something new. And that's the other thing. A lot of people do a set research period, followed by a set writing period that informs the shooting and the editing. We never stop researching and we never stop writing. So that it attenuates our process a little bit, but it certainly makes it a lot more accurate. So anyway, we're running out of time. I want to you guys are so great. And I'm so grateful for the time to spend with you today, because I just feel like I'm with people who are struggling in the same ways that I struggle, which is all a good struggle. It's back to those non-pejorative problems. And are you all optimistic about documentary? When I started off, they said that in the early 80s that, I was a few years into my professional life and people were saying we're in a golden age of documentaries, and it's only gotten better in the last 45 years. And so I sort of hope that you feel optimistic if you choose to go in there. If you have no idea what you're going to do, at least you're a digester of documentaries. Are you feeling, not everybody has to answer, but just, somebody just shout out, I'm feeling good, or I'm worried about this, or I don't like these reality TV, or I don't like the fact that sometimes the people who are connected to the story that they're telling are co-producers, and that means you can't be sure that the worst stuff isn't in there or the most complicated stuff isn't in there. What do you think?
I really enjoy it. I think using these softwares and learning all these new things, like I use Final Cut Pro, it was a great experience.
Yeah, it's a good program. Yeah, good. I'm glad. Well, I hope you guys continue that. Anybody else have a comment about that? So, the Next Generation Angel Awards, this idea is that you guys are diamonds in the rough, that you're essentially, this is rewarding potentiality. You're already diamonds. And I just wanted to tell you just how impressed I was by the level and the quality of your work. As I said, the writing, the visual stuff, obviously the limitation of the time and the ability to get stuff off the internet and different resolutions and stuff like that affect it. But I thought you guys have overcome it as well as any of the students that I've had the pleasure to spend time with on this. So I want to congratulate you and wish you the best luck, Yelena, in whatever you do. In Emerson's self-reliance essay, which if you haven't been made to read it, you will. He says that you should do whatever inly rejoices. I think he made up a word, INLY, inly rejoices. And so I hope that you guys, whatever you do pick to do, that it's inly rejoicing, because I think I've got the best job in the country, and I'm always willing to be contradicted by somebody who thinks they have the best job. So I want to thank you all on behalf of the Better Angels for making such extraordinary films and being so worthy of these awards. And I thank you for the chance to meet with you and talk with you today. It's been really enlivening. So everybody be well and continue doing good work.